Hey guys, I wanted to make a video to bring you up to date on everything that has happened since the last Palantir installment, the last Palantir video that I made, because there's quite a lot of things that have actually happened. Speaking about just the stock price in particular, that has gone up by another 5% or so. Lots of things happened, and more importantly, there are two things that are coming up in the future that us Palantir shareholders should know about and should be excited about, and I'll get into all of that. But just before we jump into the main content of the video, I want to just say, if any of you guys watching this really want to join a community of like-minded investors, then consider the Patreon. If you come and join my Patreon, you'll get access to not only my weekly portfolio updates, my buys and sells whenever literally I make any buys or sells in my own portfolio, you'll also get access to a Discord. This Discord is basically a chat server, and you can come and chat with myself and loads of other really friendly, great investors, and we talk every single day about Palantir, loads of other stocks, investing, and just life in general. Like, it's a good place to be. It's really building out. You don't have to join, obviously, no pressure, but I will leave a link in the description below. So thinking about why Palantir stock has been doing really well, and this is a question that we confront quite a lot. Why has Palantir stock been going up 5% in 5 days or down 9% over the course of a week? And you know what, in the grand scheme of things, for me as a long-term investor, it doesn't really matter. As long as the company itself is moving in the right direction. The stock price can sometimes be a little bit fragmented from the intrinsic value, and they don't always match up, and that's okay. But the reason I like to understand why a stock is doing a particular thing, why it's going up or why it's going down, is because that knowledge allows me to build a stronger conviction. That knowledge allows me to understand why other people might be freaking out, might be selling their position, or might be loading up maybe out of FOMO rather than out of actual knowledge about the company. So it is really important to understand it, even though it's maybe not always as important to action based on why a stock is moving, because sometimes the reasons are a little bit silly. So these last 5 days or so, 6 days, whenever I last made a video, whenever that was, the stock has gone up, I think about 5% in 5 days or something like that. And it has been driven by a number of clear factors. Now, I want to get the first one out of the way because this is the one that's not specifically related to Palantir, but we'll get this one out of the way, then we'll move on to the Palantir specific factors, which are very exciting, honestly. And then we'll move on to something else that is coming up in the future. Two things that are very exciting. Like, I want to talk about them. So let's just move the macro one out of the way first. So the macro factor that has been driving not only Palantir stock up, but the whole market. It's been good for the whole market, and that is that CPI numbers came in. So we heard that in July, US inflation fell to 2.9%, which was lower than the expected 3%. So inflation seems to be cooling. And then this begs the question of, does this mean that the Fed will actually cut interest rates soon? Maybe in September. Core CPI came in at 3.2%, and interestingly, this was the first time since March 2021 that inflation was below 3%. Because of these figures and these reports that came in, Wall Street is now pretty much heavily betting that on Friday, this Friday coming up at Jackson Hole, we will hear that Powell will actually confirm that the interest rates will be cut starting in September. Now, depending on what's actually announced on Friday, we'll have to see how the markets react. Obviously, the whole anticipation that interest rate cuts could be coming has made the market quite optimistic and quite bullish, and maybe that's factored into why we've seen some of the price increases recently. But on Friday, we might have more visibility into actually what's going to happen, and we'll see how the market reacts off the back of that. And by the way, just in case you didn't know, Jackson Hole is just this place where every single year people, bankers, global bankers, economists, academics, financial ministers, all these important people basically gather together from around the world and discuss economic issues. Now, personally, regardless of what happens on Friday, I don't think what will happen in the market because of that will be long lasting or anything crazy. Looking back at the data as at what's happened before, historically, when these meetings have taken place, it's not been really long lasting. Nothing really crazy has ever happened. Maybe we'll see a little bit of a spike 1 day, 2 days, whatever, but I don't think we need to start actioning our investment decisions based on that. That's just my personal opinion. And again, because of all this, we've had Goldman actually trimming the probability of a recession taking place next year from 25% to 20%. Again, this has left a lot of people feeling more optimistic about the future, and this all feeds back into the stock market. The funny thing is that everyone is predicting that a cut is coming soon, and at some point it probably will, and then everyone is suddenly right. Now, I think if I had to say, I would probably say that we can maybe expect a 25 basis point cut come in, but who knows? You know, the consensus is that we will see one happen in September, but we could also see one being delayed or not happening at all. But like I said, this is a macro factor that plays into the entire market, not just Palantir in particular. So now let's park that there and think about things that are specific to Palantir that may have been causing the stock price to go up recently. Well, I think the first thing to say is that Palantir just isn't slowing down. We had the Q2 numbers come out, they were fantastic. Then we've had new contracts, we've had lots of excitement building, lots of momentum building, and you know, it just doesn't seem to be slowing down. So one big thing that has happened recently is that the New York Times have done an exclusive piece, an exclusive interview with Dr. Alex Karp. And I really recommend that you go and read this piece. Now, it's quite long, you know, it might take you 10, 15, 20 minutes to read through. I will leave it in the description below. I do recommend you go and read it. It's very, very interesting for a number of reasons. You know, it gives you insight into how Palantir actually got started from Karp's point of view. It goes into more detail on his views into how Palantir is actually used within the defense setting, which is of course something that rocks the boat. Some people don't like, they really dislike Palantir based on the fact that the software is actually used for defense purposes. You know, that may be a factor for some investors that actually stops them investing. You know, everyone has their own views on that. He also speaks about his relationship with Peter Thiel, who I'm sure you're all very, very familiar with. And something that I found really interesting is it dives a little bit into Project Maven. In true British fashion, it started to rain, so I rushed home to finish this video, and now it is sunny again, so we'll move forward. Anyway, I think I was speaking about the Project Maven contract. So in this exclusive piece with Dr. Karp that the New York Times did, one thing that was particularly interesting within that I found interesting was they were speaking about Project Maven, and they were talking about how originally it was a Google-owned contract. So Google originally won the contract, and then following that, loads of Google employees actually protested against Google taking on the contract. They basically compiled a big letter saying lots of different things, including that they don't think that selected employees don't think that Google should be having any business in war. So Google backed out of the contract because of this, and then Palantir had a response. So Palantir basically said that Silicon Valley is telling the average American that I will not support your defense needs, whilst at the same time actually selling products that are adversarial to America. And Palantir said that is a really loserish approach, a real loser position. Following this, Palantir then got the contract, but you know, I think you should read this entire New York Times piece. I think you'll find it interesting if you're a Palantir investor. It gives you lots of insights into Dr. Alex Karp, and I'll leave it in the description below. And then we had Peter Thiel, who is of course one of the co-founders of Palantir, going on the Joe Rogan podcast. Now, the Joe Rogan podcast is massive. It's the largest podcast in the world, and this interview gets distributed onto many different platforms: Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, wherever else. But on YouTube alone right now, this conversation has 1.3 million views. Now, unfortunately, I haven't found a spare 3 hours yet to actually work through this interview. I want to give it my full focus when I do. I'll get to that very, very soon. So, you know, I've not actually heard what Joe Rogan and Peter speak about. However, I very, very much imagine they speak about artificial intelligence, technology in defense, maybe even Palantir specifically, which is it's big, big exposure for Palantir. And I also noticed that in the description of that video on YouTube, of that podcast, one of only 2 websites actually linked was the website to Palantir. So it's massive, massive exposure. But if you've already listened to it, let me know if you recommend it. Let me know your highlights. You know, I know many, many investors really like to follow what Peter's doing, and a lot of you really love his book 0 to 1 as well. Then we have some really exciting news for us Palantir investors, and I came across this originally from an account on X called Karp, which I recommend you go and follow. He focuses mainly on the government side of Palantir, I believe. So there is a new Titan contract coming from the US government, and this contract is expected to be worth between $1 billion and $1.5 billion, and expected to run between 2026 and 2031. The military has authorized the construction of 96 additional Titan units, Titan standing for Tactical Intelligence Targeting Access Nodes. And remember that it wasn't that long ago that we heard that Palantir was given a Titan contract. Now, my interpretation of this at this current stage with the information that we've got is that Palantir will not get this contract in its entirety. I know that a lot of people, a lot of Palantir investors are really, really excited about the idea of Palantir getting a new $1.5 billion through this contract. The reason that I don't think they'll get that entire amount is because this contract, when I was reading through it, it specifies both software and hardware. So I very, very much believe that Palantir has an incredibly strong chance, given their history with Titan, for securing the software part of this, and that will give them a portion of the revenue from this contract. But obviously there's the hardware section as well. So I don't think they're going to get all of it. Probably a portion. I don't know if that portion of software revenue will be split between other companies or just Palantir. Maybe Palantir will be the prime and they'll get it all. That would be great. But regardless, this is a big, big deal. This is very important work, and it would be fantastic to hear that Palantir is indeed getting involved in this again. And then we have to think about how this will feed into the government revenue and growth that we want to keep seeing. Then we have something else upcoming that we speak about on this channel every 3 months or so, and that is of course the S&P 500 inclusion. The next rebalancing event for the S&P 500 index is coming up next month in September. So this will happen over 2 days. So early in September, on the 6th, I believe, we will hear which companies have been announced to join the S&P 500. And then on the 20th of September, so the 3rd Friday in the month, we will actually see that rebalancing take place. So we will have some companies removed from the S&P index, and we will have the ones that are going to be added to the index. So Palantir are still eligible. They've been eligible for a while now for S&P 500 inclusion, but eligibility, meeting the criteria required, doesn't mean that you're automatically guaranteed to be added at any given point. Ultimately it comes back to a committee of people, and they decide who gets added to the S&P every single time that a rebalancing event takes place. But they have a chance, and of course we have spoken many, many times on this channel about why that's important and what that actually means if they are added to the S&P 500 index, what it means in terms of intrinsic value for the company, but also what it might mean for the stock price as well. So I won't go through that because, like I said, we've spoken about that many, many times before. But there are also other companies that, like Palantir, are eligible for inclusion. And these companies include Workday, Trade Desk, and Dell. Workday and Trade Desk right now, as far as I believe, have a higher institutional ownership percentage than Palantir, and Trade Desk as well, I believe, have been growing their revenue faster. So because of these factors, and then obviously Dell is just a massive, massive name, because of these factors, it's possible that maybe Palantir doesn't get included this time round and we have to wait another 3 months or so. But ultimately it doesn't matter. It will happen at some point. It's just a matter of when, not if, in my opinion now. We do have to also appreciate that Palantir's institutional ownership has been gradually increasing as well, which is a really, really good sign. We saw that in the Q2 earnings, the revenue growth is looking strong. It's increasing. It's going in the right direction. And like I said, at some point this milestone will be reached. It's a massive milestone and I'm excited for when it does happen. But if it doesn't happen this time around, it doesn't change anything for me. It probably is even beneficial because with institutional addition, you're going to get a lot of institutional ownership and institutional money coming in. When the company is within an index like the S&P 500, one of the biggest in the world, that automatically means that more Palantir stock is being purchased by these big funds that track the S&P 500. So it is probably going to increase the stock price, at least in the short term. So I don't mind if it doesn't happen this time around. I'll continue to stick to my plan, stick to my strategy, and at some point in the future it will happen. But do let me know your thoughts on everything discussed in today's video in the comments below, and also let me know what you've been doing with Palantir in your portfolio recently. Have you been taking profit? Have you been buying more? Have you just been sticking to what you've got and you're riding out the volatility that's happening right now? Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.